going to do a wet fly today. This is the Canada. This is another fly that is in Ray Bergman's book on trout. It's an interesting little fly because the tail back here, the recipe calls for tying that in as a tip, but it is, I think, more of a tail that is cut back real short to more or less kind of represent a tip. The other thing is it uses some gray turkey, and I'm using some Ozark turkey for this. I chose this fly partly because turkey and I have a difficult time with the turkey feathers for a number of different reasons. I generally haven't worked with them a whole lot, but they're not as easy as straightforward as the duck quill or goose quill. And I'm going to push myself to do a few wet flies and various other things using turkey just to learn the subtleties of the feathers a little bit more. Other than that, it's a straightforward wet fly with throat, body, and rib. There is no gold tip or tag on the back of this. That's the Canada. Fun fly. I'll get started. Start the Canada by placing my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 3399 in a size 4. I want to debarb the hook. Then I'll attach my tying thread. I'm going to start off with a Danville 6/0 in white because of the red floss body on this. I've already waxed the thread, and I'm going to just lay a base layer of thread along the hook shank and get back here to just a little bit past the point of the hook. I'll tie in our first material is going to be a tail. Now the interesting thing is the recipe in Ray Bergman's trout calls this a tip. There really isn't a tip on this or a tag on the back end, and it eludes me a little bit what the subtleties are there in terms of what the tip and the tag is. Tails are pretty obvious. Tails usually go in are longer, but this one is going to be tied in, and it's going to extend just a little bit past the bend a little bit, or just even with the bend of the hook. So it, I guess, technically is considered a tail. First thing I'm going to do, I'm using this is a sparkle yarn. It's a Wapsi product, red sparkle yarn. I think it's mostly just a Antron yarn. First thing I want to do on the end here is I want to cut this and trim this at an angle. And the reason for that is that when we tie this in, I want to have a taper right up here towards the head. If I don't, then I'm going to end up with a ledge right here to try and finish the fly off with. I'll put the end of that just end of the body. I'll wrap that in, working my way down the hook shank. Slipped a little there, and I'm just going to keep going till I'm just past, even with the barb, or a little bit past it. I'm going to place my scissors right at the bend of the hook, and I'm going to actually drop back maybe about a 32nd of an inch. The reason is I have this material under tension. When I let go, it's going to spring back. So if I were to cut right here at the bend, this is going to end up a little bit shorter than I want. So I'm just going to come in at the bend of the hook, drop down a little bit, and cut that. Using my bodkin, I'm just going to fluff that out a little bit. And you can see that that tail is very, very short. It just comes even with the bend of the hook. It's tied in mostly as kind of a tip or a tag. The rib on this is a gold tinsel. I'm using a Danville size 14 Mylar and gold tinsel. I want to tie this with the silver side up. Just one wrap in to secure that a little bit. And I'm going to also place a little bit more tying wax on my thread. And then tie in the body. The body is a red floss. I'm using a Danville 4-strand Rayon red floss. Now I'm going to advance my thread forward, binding in the floss, the rib, as well as the tail material for a nice smooth underbody. Take your time with this. You do want to get most of your wraps nice touching turns so that you end up with a nice smooth body. You might get a few of them that are a little open. As you can see, I have a few strands of that sparkle yarn sticking out here and there, and that's fine. It's going to get covered up by the floss. Now I'll wrap my floss body, and then once that's tied in, I'll put my rib in with 5 nice evenly spaced wraps for the rib. With the body and the rib tied in, I'm now going to change over to my black thread, using a Danville 6/0 in black to finish the fly off. This I have also already waxed. Throat is just some red Schlappen. Calls for a red Hackle, and I'm just using a Schlappen. If you don't have Schlappen, by all means, go ahead and get some rooster saddle hackle, even some hen. If you've got some bright red hen hackles that you can, get some barbs off for a nice throat, that will work. I'll take the feather and peel away the fluff. And then on each side here, I'll separate out probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch along the rachis there. Get the tips evened up, peel those off, and then I'll set those aside, and then turn the feather over to get the other side. I'll match up the tips on those, and then I've got my barbs together for my throat. Tidy that up just a little bit. I'll place those in. I like the tips to come about halfway down the throat of the hook, which is about to the point of the barb. Do a reverse pinch and loop and get those tied in. We can trim away the excess. Now, I chose to use the sparkle yarn on this, by the way. I wanted something a little bit brighter. I originally had used some just red wool, and it was a little bit darker. I did find that I had some red Schlappen that matched up the darker red hues of the red wool, but I also found another package of Schlappen that was a little bit brighter. Thought I'd take a moment to mention something to you here. I decided to go with the brighter one and the sparkle yarn because I wanted something that was going to be a little bit brighter in the water. But when you're purchasing living materials like this, these feathers are a living material. This isn't something that we have any quality control over in terms of the quality, the length of the feather, the length of the barbs, and how thick they are, and so on. They just grow into what they grow. Even though these are white and dyed red, even that we have not 100% quality on. What that means is that each packet that you get is potentially going to be a little different from the other one. So when you go into a fly shop and you go to purchase some Schlappen, or whether it's this, or whether it's rooster hackles or duck quills or even deer hair or something like that, what you want to do is look at each item on that peg, because the difference in colors, difference in textures, difference in thickness, you may find that the one that's sitting right out on the end doesn't suit your needs, but 2 or 3 back, you're going to find one that maybe does, or you might find that none of them do. In this case, I did have a packet of Schlappen that was a nice brighter red that matched up with this sparkle yarn a little bit better, and so that's what I decided to go with. Just a little tip there when now if you're purchasing online, a lot of times you just have to deal with the fact that you get what they put in the box. If you have a shop, whether it's online or even you walk into, that you have a good rapport with, you can talk to them. Even if it's online, you can send them a note with your order and say, this is what I'm tying up, this is what I'm looking for. And I think most shops are more than willing to put in a little extra effort to meet your needs. So for the wing for the Canada, we're using, it's a gray mottled turkey. I'm using some gray, this is a mottled Ozark turkey feather, and I'm going to cut a right and a left out here so that I have a slip. The thing with the turkey feathers here, when you cut these out, you're putting them concave side together. So what that's going to end up doing is flattening it out. Like the goose quills that I've used for some recent videos, when you put those together, the concave sides are out. So the wings tend to flare outward. So I've got my slips together. You want these to be, I like them to be about 2/3 of the width of the gap. The interesting thing is you have to remember with the turkey, the barbules themselves are tapered. So when you cut these out right next to the rachis, the barbules are thicker, but as you work your way down towards the tip, they get thinner. So if you're wanting to have where the tie-in spot is, which is right about here, if I'm wanting that to be about 2/3 of the gap of the hook, I'm probably going to have to guesstimate and clip off something that's closer to the gap of the hook down by the rachis so that I have the right width that I'm looking for. A little practice, a little trial and error, you'll figure that out. So I'm going to place that on top. I do want the tip of that to go past the tail. If there was a regular tail about a shank length long on here, it would be back to about here, and the wing would go about halfway down that tail. I'm going to tie that in with a little pinch wrap. 4 or 5 wraps to secure it. And we'll take a look at our wing. The other thing is with the Ozark turkey, the tips of each of these barbs tend to be a little thinner, sometimes even a little more beat up. So when you're getting your slips out of that feather, you want to take a look at these tips here. If you have some that are really, really ragged, then maybe skip that section of cutting that out for your slips and go for a section maybe like this up here where they're not quite so ragged. I don't think it's going to matter so much as a fishing fly, but if you're going to frame it or, give it to somebody, or I guess post it on the internet where they have to look just perfect, then keep that in mind. Trimming away the excess, we will create the head of the fly. I am going to put in a 9 or 10 turn whip finish, but I want to flatten my thread first. The flattening of the thread like this simply allows the thread to fill in some of these little valleys as I am using the whip finish, or I should say using the thread to create the whip finish, and smooth off the head while I'm creating the whip finish. You don't have to do this. Especially when if you're going to put some lacquer on this or some sort of top coat, even a clear hard as hull or something like that on it to help protect it, it's going to fill that in and smooth it off. So you don't necessarily have to flatten the thread. I got a little bit of wing material sticking out here, but that's fine. When I put the black lacquer on that will cover that up. So right now I'll put in a little bit of head cement on both sides. That will soak down in. I'll come back and put some black lacquer on that, a couple of coats, so it'll look nice and smooth and shiny. And then our Canada is done. Thought it was an interesting fly. You don't see a lot of them with a tail that is that short to more or less represent, a tip or a tag. Again, if anybody knows the differences between those and how that gets defined, feel free to add some information in the comments down below. I'm trimming away some of these fibers that are sticking out simply because it looks a little bit better on the screen, but as far as a fishing fly, and actually as far as a fly for framing, I think this is complete. Got one little thread sticking right there. So that's the Canada. Still trying to improve my working with the turkey. So you might see a few more wet flies with turkey in the wing. And what information I glean from the better turkey feathers to use for tying, I shall pass on. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.